Hi, I'm Steve Berkowitz. I'm a sports projects reporter at USA Today, and I thank you for joining me here on Facebook Live. I'm here to talk about our college football head coaches salary database project that we put out online yesterday and is in this morning's print editions of USA Today. This is the 10th time that we've done this. Goes back to 2006. We did it the first time then as to have a sort of 20-year look back at the first time that USA Today had looked at college football coaches' pay in a comprehensive sort of way. So then we did that one comparison year. We were pretty surprised by the results, and people seemed to be really interested in the amounts of money that the coaches were making. So we went ahead and did it again the following year to see sort of how things compared from one year to the next. We skipped it in 2008. We've been doing it every year since, beginning in 2009. We started adding information about the amounts of money that are paid to assistant football coaches in the football bowl subdivision. We've been doing that every year since. So, and that'll be coming up probably toward the end of November, the early part of December. So you should look for that coming up. We'll have all of the compensation paid to assistant coaches in the football bowl subdivision as well. So with that as some background, this year, as we do every year, we pick a particular place to try to focus our story as opposed to just providing a news story with basic findings. This year, we decided to take a look at the trends in buyouts, which would be the amounts of money that coaches get paid if they are fired without cause, which is sort of the technical term for saying not winning enough games. And we found that the amounts of money that coaches were getting for getting fired by the schools has been going up quite precipitously, along with the salaries. This year we found that there are 7 coaches that would be entitled to get $20 million or more from their schools if they get fired for not winning enough games. There are also now, we now have up to 30 coaches who are over in being entitled to get to $8 million. It's actually 33 coaches who'd be getting $8 million as a buyout if they get fired, compared to 15 going back to 2011. So there's been, in addition to the amounts of money that coaches are getting paid for doing their jobs, the amounts of money that coaches are getting when they don't do their jobs has also been going up as well. We talked about this in the context particularly of the contract that Iowa's Kirk Ferentz got earlier this year, which was a new 10-year agreement for him that is guaranteeing him in the neighborhood of $25 million if he were to be terminated now. So with all of that, we're going to I'll get into some questions here that we've gotten through Twitter over the last day or so as stuff has come out onto our website at usatoday.com. And again, to remind for those of you who are just joining us, I'm Steve Berkowitz. I'm a sports projects reporter at USA Today, and we're talking about our new college football coaches database. And here I'm going to get into some questions that we've gotten about what we've published. Highly asked, why is there such a big difference between what coaches make in the Big 12 and what coaches make in the SEC? The biggest difference, the biggest driver of these kinds of things really is the revenue of the athletics programs. And by and large, the revenue of athletics programs these days is driven largely by television. The Southeastern Conference at the moment, along with the Big Ten, have the biggest, most lucrative television contracts. The SEC also has an advantage on the Big 12 in terms of the numbers of schools and the sizes of the football stadiums, really across the board. Also, there's really no conference that matches the fan interest and fan affinity that exists within the Southeastern Conference's school regional area. These are folks who are really, really interested in college sports, who donate to those schools in a big way, and just so the more money that's available in the athletics program, the more money that those schools can pay their coaches, and that's what's occurred. So particularly this past year, you saw quite a few coaches now moving past $4 million a year in compensation at SEC schools. They're now, when the season began, before Les Miles was fired, there were 9 of the 14 coaches in the SEC that are making $4 million or more this year. In fact, those 9, all of them are above $4.1 million for this season. So That gets at why, that gives you some idea as to the difference in what's going on within the SEC as opposed to the Big 12 and other conferences. We got a question from JK, who asked whether or not David Shaw is the highest paid employee at Stanford. And the answer to that question is yes. Not only, according to, and this gives you some idea of how we get at the numbers for private schools. Private schools are organized, as all universities, as nonprofit organizations, but because they are not as non-public institutions, they're non-governmental agencies, they have to file tax returns with the IRS. So every year we get copies of those tax disclosures by the schools, and those documents are required to provide compensation information for officers and directors and other key employees of the university. And then anybody who is not who falls into one of those areas, who is one of the 5 highest paid employees of the university, the school has to disclose compensation information for them. And not surprisingly, athletic employees are usually among those top 5. In Stanford's case, until a few years ago when Jim Harbaugh was getting paid $3 million, coaches did not get on to the tax return at Stanford because their officers and directors were paid high, as were people who in their medical school, and those folks were generally the highest paid. Now with Stanford being successful and wanting to retain their coaches, David Shaw is their highest paid employee, and in the last tax return, which showed their compensation for the 2014 calendar year, and there's a big lag in the reporting on these documents, David Shaw was not only the highest paid employee at Stanford in 2014, he had the highest compensation of any Stanford employee in the 7 years of the current IRS reporting form. So that gives you some idea of the scope of what's going on there and how things have changed even at a place that's really academically oriented like Stanford is, and with that renown and the type of school that you have there. Just to remind folks who are just joining us, I'm Steve Berkowitz. I'm a sports projects reporter with USA Today, and I'm talking about our findings this year with our annual college football coaches compensation database. We're looking at the head coaches at this point this year. We'll be looking at assistant coaches' pay later in the year. But as I'm going along here, I'm trying to pick up some questions about that folks have asked about our findings for this year. Curtis had asked, it's really surprising how low Notre Dame's pay is, and why is that? The amount of money that we list for Brian Kelly as a coach at Notre Dame is a little less than $2 million. And this again gets into the vagaries of how certain schools report their figures. As is the case with Stanford, Notre Dame discloses its compensation on its tax return. The difference is that Notre Dame's tax return, in the notes on the return, they point out that Brian Kelly's compensation with what they report is probably a little bit low because with the university's permission, the school says, Kelly has arrangements with outside companies, which would tend to indicate that like a lot of schools, there are arrangements made for shoe and apparel deals, local radio television deals, or in Notre Dame's case, it could be a national kind of arrangement as well because of the scope of Notre Dame's reach in the country. So it's highly likely, based on what Notre Dame tells you on their tax return, that Brian Kelly is getting additional money beyond what he's getting paid by the school from a shoe and apparel company, and is potentially getting money from a TV or radio arrangement. He could also be getting paid money from a camp or other speaking appearances or other deals that he has that Notre Dame is aware of and allows him to have. So undoubtedly Brian Kelly is making more than what we have in the paper. There's a similar arrangement at the University of North Carolina, and while North Carolina is a public school, North Carolina allows its coaches to have deals for shoe and apparel and television that are slightly different, that are off from their regular contract. Most public schools now roll all of that consideration into the contract. The money from Nike or Adidas or Under Armour, that money would go to the school, and the school then pays the coach, and they they use that as consideration for those endorsements. North Carolina allows the coach to have those deals off his contract, and then another quirk with North Carolina is that while coaches have had to supply information about their outside income, at least until this past August when the NCAA changed their rules about that reporting. North Carolina's open records laws allow the university to withhold that information, or depending on your viewpoint, that they're required to withhold that information as a personnel record. As a result, the reporting that Larry Fedora has done about his outside income with a shoe company or any other outfit, while he may be reporting that income to the university officials at North Carolina, that information is not disclosed. So that's why Larry Fedora's income is probably underreported, as well as Notre Dame's. Again, just to remind folks who are just joining in here, I'm Steve Berkowitz. I'm a sports projects reporter with USA Today, and I'm talking about our findings and picking up questions that we've received about our reporting, our annual report of this year of football coaches' compensation in the Football Bowl subdivision of the NCAA. We've also gotten a question through Twitter about how many schools have athletic fees or tap into the student activities fees. And the answer to that is most. There are very few schools that do not charge an athletic fee. That athletic fee is charged generally in exchange for allowing students to have either free or highly subsidized access to tickets to sports events on campus. And those funds are rolled into the athletics department's general funds and are used for all activities of the athletics department. So while it would be very difficult to make the case that student fees are directly going to coaches' compensation, they're going into a larger pool of money, and money being fungible, that's part of what's driving and helping to pay for the coaches. Some schools are more subsidized than others through these student fees. At some schools, there are very nominal student fees. At other schools, there's a huge percentage of the athletics budget that comes either from student fees or just from direct money coming from the university's general fund that's used to help fund the athletics department on an annual basis. So it varies from place to place. Schools that are in conferences where there's less television money, such as the Mid-American, the Sun Belt, those schools tend to have greater amounts of money coming from student fees or from general support of the university. But there are schools in major conferences who get quite a bit of money from student fees and from the school itself. Rutgers is an example of one of those types of schools. And so it varies from place to place, but student fee money does factor into this on a certain level. Also got a question from Trevor that asks what stops Tennessee from paying Chip Kelly $8 million. Well, at the moment, the first thing that would stop Tennessee from paying Chip Kelly that kind of money is that Tennessee currently has a football coach, Butch Jones, who's making a little over $4 million at the moment. But as a short answer to the question, there's really nothing that's stopping Tennessee from paying a football coach $8 million. We found this year that Michigan is paying Jim Harbaugh $9 million. That's not going to be Jim Harbaugh's pay every year. Harbaugh's pay for this year is driven in part by an unusual amount of money that he's getting from a deferred compensation arrangement. Normally that deferred compensation arrangement in future years will pay him $2 million a year. This year he's getting two of those $2 million payments. So as a result, he's ending up with $9 million in compensation for this year. And with bonuses that Harbaugh would get, if Michigan were to win the national championship, Harbaugh's take from Michigan this year would actually be over $10 million. So, and you put that in the context of Harbaugh, he's a public employee working for a public university. He's working in the nonprofit sector, and he's working within the higher ed environment as well, and he'd be getting paid over $10 million this year. Also, I mean, Nick Saban is close to $7 million at Alabama, and so, you know, that's a function of what the university thinks that the coach is worth to them and sort of what the market will bear in terms of what schools are willing to pay. So the only thing that sort of drives what schools will pay for coaches is what they think their constituents are willing to allow them to pay, or what they feel they need to pay, either to retain a coach that they want to hire or to get another coach that they want to pick up.
We have a question from Facebook. It's more of a comment. Norman says Saban earns every penny, roll tide roll. Can you talk a little bit about Saban, why it looked like he got a pay cut this year, but in reality, not quite?
Sure. Nick Saban this year compared to prior years, in the last few years, Nick Saban's total pay has been over $7 million, and this year it's a little bit under. And the reason that's occurred is that the NCAA in August made a rules change, and it's not the people in Indianapolis who made the rules change. The representatives of the schools themselves made a change. Schools have been required to collect from their athletics department employees disclosure forms that talk about athletically related outside income. So it doesn't mean that a coach would have to disclose money that he's making in the stock market or in a real estate investment, but if he's getting money from doing an ad for Coca-Cola that's basically based on him being the Alabama football coach, which has been the case for Nick Saban in recent years, they are supposed to disclose that money. And in most years, while we've been doing this, Nick Saban has had at least $150,000 of this athletically related outside income. This year, Alabama is no longer required to pick up that information, and they're not. So there was no document for us to get through public records, which is how we acquire all of these documents, how we require all the information for our survey. We do it through public records requests to get the actual contract documents from the schools. And so that document doesn't exist anymore. There are some schools that have told us they're planning to continue collecting this information from the coaches just so that they have an idea of what the coaches' outside arrangements are and who they're working for. But as far as what's going on with Saban and the amount of money that he generates, I mean, the football program at Alabama unquestionably generates tens and tens of millions of dollars. And certainly there's an incremental difference between what Nick Saban has helped them get through winning than maybe another coach. But part of the thing to keep in mind as well, there's a certain revenue streams for these schools that are pretty fixed. A large part of athletic department revenue every year comes from revenue shares from their conferences through television deals. So there's a certain amount of money that really is tied to football television revenue that a school is going to get no matter who's coaching the team or how many games that they win. Those revenue shares also include their shares of money from bowl games or the college football playoff. And so that's where those funds come from. From Steve Berkowitz, I've been talking here about findings from our college football coaches salary database for this year, and wanted to thank you all for joining in, and we hope you'll look for other coverage on this topic and for our assistant coaches pay survey, which would be towards the end of November and the early part of December. Thanks a lot for joining us.